Sister Mary Catherine had always found solace in the gardens of St. Raphael's Convent in Savannah, Georgia. The humid southern air carried the scent of magnolia blossoms and jasmine as she knelt among the tomato plants on this sweltering July morning, her weathered hands carefully tending to the vegetables that would feed the convent's soup kitchen. At 58, she had spent nearly 4 decades serving at St. Raphael's, watching the historic district around them transform while their small community remained a constant beacon of service in the heart of Georgia's oldest city. The convent, built in 1887, sat on a tree-lined square just blocks from Forsyth Park, its red brick facade and wrought-iron balconies reflecting the distinctive architecture that made Savannah famous. The gardens behind the building had been Sister Mary Catherine's special project for over 20 years, providing fresh produce for their community meals and serving as a peaceful retreat where she could pray and reflect away from the bustle of their daily ministries. As she worked in the early morning heat, trying to finish her gardening before the Georgia sun became unbearable, Sister Mary Catherine noticed something unusual, glinting in the soil near the old oak tree that dominated the center of their garden. The massive live oak, draped with Spanish moss, had been there long before the convent was built, and over the decades it had become a favorite spot for the sisters to sit and read their daily prayers. Brushing away the dark, rich earth, Sister Mary Catherine's fingers encountered something smooth and rectangular buried about 3 inches below the surface. She carefully excavated the object, revealing what appeared to be an old photograph in a tarnished silver frame, the kind that had been popular in the 1940s and 1950s. The photo was remarkably well preserved, despite being buried, protected by the metal frame and the acidic soil common to coastal Georgia. As she wiped away the remaining dirt with her gardening apron, Sister Mary Catherine found herself looking at a black and white image that made her heart stop. The photograph showed a young man in his early 20s, handsome and smiling, standing beside a beautiful woman in a flowing white wedding dress. They were posed in front of what appeared to be a small country church, and the woman held a bouquet of gardenias, a flower that grew abundantly in Georgia. The man's face was unmistakably familiar, despite the passage of decades. It was Father Thomas McKenna, the beloved priest who had served St. Raphael's parish for the past 15 years. But that was impossible. Father McKenna had been ordained, straight from seminary, had taken vows of celibacy like all Catholic priests, and had never mentioned having been married. Sister Mary Catherine studied the photograph more closely, noting the style of the woman's dress and the man's haircut, which suggested the photo had been taken sometime in the late 1940s or early 1950s. The woman in the photograph was stunningly beautiful, with dark hair styled in the victory rolls popular during the post-war era, and kind eyes that seemed to sparkle even in the faded black and white image. At the bottom of the photograph, in elegant script handwriting, were the words, Thomas and Margaret McKenna, June 15, 1951, Blessed Sacrament Church, Macon, Georgia. Sister Mary Catherine's hands began to tremble as she stared at the photograph. Father McKenna would have been born around 1929, making him 22 in 1951. Exactly the right age to be the young man in this wedding photo. But if this was real, it meant that Father McKenna had been married before becoming a priest, something that was possible in the Catholic Church only under very specific and rare circumstances, typically involving widowhood and subsequent calling to the priesthood. But Father McKenna had never mentioned being widowed. In all their conversations over the years, in all his homilies about love, loss, and faith, he had never indicated that he had personal experience with marriage or the loss of a spouse. The parish records showed him as being ordained in 1978, at age 49, which was unusually late for priestly ordination, but not unheard of for men who experienced their calling later in life. Sister Mary Catherine looked around the empty garden, her mind racing with questions and implications. How had this photograph ended up buried beneath the oak tree? Had Father McKenna buried it himself years ago, or had someone else hidden it? And most importantly, what had happened to Margaret McKenna? The morning sun was climbing higher, and Sister Mary Catherine could hear the sounds of the convent waking up. Footsteps in the corridors, the gentle murmur of morning prayers, and the clatter of breakfast preparations in the kitchen. She carefully wrapped the photograph in her gardening apron and made her way back to her small room, her mind spinning with the weight of what she had discovered. Sister Mary Catherine's room was sparse and simple, furnished with just a narrow bed, a wooden desk, a straight-backed chair, and a crucifix on the wall. She sat at her desk and examined the photograph under the better light from her reading lamp, hoping she had been mistaken, that the resemblance to Father McKenna was just a coincidence. But the more she studied the image, the more certain she became. The eyes were identical, kind, intelligent, with small laugh lines at the corners. The nose was the same distinctive shape, and there was a small scar on the young man's chin that she had noticed on Father McKenna countless times. Even the way he held his left shoulder slightly higher than his right was a mannerism she recognized from watching him celebrate Mass for 15 years. Over the next several days, Sister Mary Catherine found herself in a state of constant distraction. During morning prayers, she would catch herself staring at Father McKenna, looking for signs of the young man in the photograph. During their weekly parish council meetings, she studied his expressions for any hint of hidden sadness or secrets. She even found herself paying attention to his homilies with new ears, listening for any references to marriage, loss, or life experiences that might explain the photograph. Father McKenna, for his part, seemed unchanged. He continued his pastoral duties with the same gentle dedication that had made him beloved throughout Savannah's Catholic community. He visited the sick in the hospital, counseled young couples preparing for marriage, and celebrated Mass with the reverent dignity that had always characterized his ministry. If he was carrying the weight of a secret past, he showed no signs of it. But Sister Mary Catherine began to notice small details she had overlooked before. In Father McKenna's office, there were no personal photographs, no images of family, friends from seminary, or mementos from his ordination. For a man who had been a priest for over 20 years, his personal space was remarkably devoid of the kind of sentimental objects that most clergy accumulated over their careers. She also remembered something that had puzzled her years earlier. When new parishioners asked Father McKenna about his background, his answers were always vague. He would mention growing up in rural Georgia, attending seminary in Atlanta, and feeling called to serve in Savannah, but he never provided the kind of specific details about family, hometown, or formative experiences that most priests shared freely. A week after finding the photograph, Sister Mary Catherine made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed during her decades of religious life. She drove to the Chatham County Library downtown and spent the afternoon searching through old newspapers and public records, looking for any information about Thomas and Margaret McKenna in Macon, Georgia, circa 1951. The microfiche machines in the library's genealogy section were clunky and difficult to navigate, but Sister Mary Catherine persevered, scrolling through edition after edition of the Macon Telegraph from the summer of 1951. Finally, in the June 17, 1951 edition, she found what she was looking for. The social page featured a small announcement. Miss Margaret Elizabeth Sullivan became the bride of Mr. Thomas Patrick McKenna in a ceremony performed at Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church on Friday, June 15th. The bride is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. James Sullivan of Macon, and the groom is the son of Mr. and Mrs. Patrick McKenna of Dublin, Georgia. Following a wedding trip to Tybee Island, The couple will make their home in Macon, where Mr. McKenna is employed by Central Georgia Railway. Sister Mary Catherine's heart pounded as she read the announcement. The details matched the photograph perfectly. The date, the church, even the names. But the announcement raised new questions. If Thomas McKenna had been married in 1951 and working for the railroad, what had happened to change the course of his life so dramatically that he ended up in seminary 27 years later? She continued searching through the newspaper archives, looking for any other mentions of Thomas and Margaret McKenna. What she found in the Macon Telegraph, dated September 23, 1952, stopped her cold. The obituary section contained a small notice. Mrs. Margaret Elizabeth McKenna, 21, died Friday at Macon Hospital following complications from childbirth. She is survived by her husband, Thomas McKenna, and infant daughter, Sarah Elizabeth McKenna. Services will be held at Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church, with burial in Riverside Cemetery. Sister Mary Catherine stared at the obituary, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. The beautiful young woman in the wedding photograph had died at 21, leaving behind a husband and newborn daughter. The tragedy began to explain Father McKenna's path to the priesthood, but it raised even more questions. What had happened to the baby? Where was Sarah Elizabeth McKenna now? She spent another hour searching through the records, but found no further mention of Thomas McKenna or his daughter in the Macon newspapers. It was as if they had simply disappeared from public record after Margaret's death. That evening, Sister Mary Catherine sat in the convent chapel during evening prayers, the photograph hidden in her prayer book as she struggled with what to do with her discovery. Father McKenna knelt in his usual place in the front pew, his gray head bowed in prayer, and she found herself studying his profile with new understanding. The man she had known for 15 years as a dedicated celibate priest had once been a young husband devastated by the loss of his wife and left to raise a daughter alone. The weight of that tragedy, the loneliness and grief he must have experienced, suddenly made his calling to the priesthood seem less like a simple spiritual awakening and more like a complex journey through loss, faith, and redemption. But knowing this secret also placed Sister Mary Catherine in an impossible position. If Father McKenna had wanted the parish to know about his past, he would have shared it. By investigating his background, she had crossed a line that violated his privacy and potentially threatened his position within the Church. The Catholic Church's rules regarding married men becoming priests were complex and had evolved over the centuries. While the Roman Catholic Church generally required celibacy of its priests, there were exceptions for men who had been married and widowed before ordination. However, the process required extensive evaluation, approval from the Vatican, and complete transparency about the candidate's past. If Father McKenna had been properly vetted and approved for ordination despite his previous marriage, then his past was a private matter that the Church had already addressed. But if he had somehow concealed his married status during the seminary application process, the implications could be catastrophic for both him personally and for the parish community that had come to love and depend on him. Sister Mary Catherine spent the next several days in prayer and contemplation, seeking guidance about how to handle her discovery. She considered speaking directly to Father McKenna, but the thought of confronting him with evidence of his buried past seemed cruel and potentially destructive. She thought about consulting with Mother Superior, but that would mean involving the Church hierarchy in a matter that might be better left private. As she struggled with her decision, Sister Mary Catherine began to observe Father McKenna more carefully, looking for signs of how his hidden past might be affecting his present ministry. What she saw surprised her. Rather than detecting deception or emotional damage, she noticed the depth of compassion he brought to his pastoral care, particularly when working with families facing loss or couples struggling in their marriages. During a parish council meeting where they discussed the growing number of young military families dealing with deployment separations, Father McKenna spoke with unusual passion about the importance of supporting spouses left to manage alone. When counseling a couple whose marriage was troubled by financial stress, he demonstrated an understanding of marital dynamics that seemed to come from personal experience rather than theological training. Most tellingly, when visiting families in the hospital's maternity ward to bless newborn babies, Sister Mary Catherine noticed that Father McKenna always spent extra time with mothers who had experienced difficult deliveries or postpartum complications. His prayers for these families carried an emotional weight that suggested personal understanding of how quickly joy could turn to tragedy in the birthing process. 2 weeks after finding the photograph, Sister Mary Catherine was working in the parish office when she overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. Father McKenna was speaking to someone about making arrangements for a visit, and she caught fragments of the conversation that made her heart race. "Yes, Sarah, I'll be there for your graduation ceremony. I know your mother would be so proud. 43 years old, can you believe it? I'll drive up to Atlanta on Friday, and we can have dinner before the ceremony on Saturday." Sister Mary Catherine felt her hands begin to shake as she realized what she was hearing. Sarah, the infant daughter mentioned in Margaret McKenna's 1952 obituary, was apparently alive, grown, and still in contact with Father McKenna. He had maintained a relationship with his daughter throughout his years as a priest, somehow managing to balance his pastoral duties with his responsibilities as a father. The complexity of Father McKenna's situation suddenly became clear. He wasn't simply a widowed man who had become a priest after losing his wife. He was a father who had somehow found a way to honor both his calling to the priesthood and his obligations to his child. The secrecy surrounding his past wasn't about deception, it was about protecting both his daughter's privacy and his ability to serve effectively as a parish priest. That evening, Sister Mary Catherine made a decision that she hoped reflected both wisdom and compassion. She walked to Father McKenna's office and knocked gently on the door. "Father, do you have a few minutes? There's something I need to discuss with you." Father McKenna looked up from the sermon he was preparing for Sunday Mass, and Sister Mary Catherine was struck by how tired he looked. The weight of maintaining his secret over the years had apparently taken its toll, even if he had hidden it. Well, from his parishioners. "Of course, Sister Mary Catherine. Please, sit down. You look like something's troubling you." Sister Mary Catherine reached into her apron pocket and withdrew the photograph, placing it gently on Father McKenna's desk. "I found this buried in the convent garden last week, Father, under the old oak tree." Father McKenna's face went completely white as he stared at the wedding photograph. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, and Sister Mary Catherine could see tears forming in his eyes. "I buried this there 23 years ago," he said quietly. "The night before I left for seminary. I couldn't bear to keep it, but I couldn't bear to throw it away either. I thought it would be safe there, that no one would ever find it. Father, I need you to know that I didn't go looking for information about your past intentionally. But after I found the photograph, I felt compelled to understand what it meant. I know about Margaret, and I know about Sarah." Father McKenna closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. "How much do you know?" "I know that you were married in 1951, that Margaret died in childbirth in 1952, and that you have a daughter named Sarah who's now 43 years old. I also know that you've maintained a relationship with her throughout your priesthood." For several long minutes, Father McKenna sat in silence, staring at the photograph of his young bride. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with years of carried secrets. Margaret was everything to me, Sister Mary Catherine. We were childhood sweethearts in Macon, married young because we couldn't imagine life without each other. When she died giving birth to Sarah, I thought my world had ended. I was 23 years old, suddenly alone with a newborn daughter, and completely lost. He set the photograph down carefully, as if it were made of glass. I tried to raise Sarah on my own for 6 years, but I was working double shifts at the railroad to pay the bills, and she needed more stability than I could provide. My sister and her husband in Atlanta were unable to have children, so Sarah went to live with them when she was 6. They legally adopted her, gave her their last name, and provided her with the loving home she deserved. But you stayed in touch with her? Always. She knew I was her father, and we maintained a close relationship. When she was in high school, I began to feel called to the priesthood. The grief and loneliness of losing Margaret had led me to question everything about faith, purpose, and meaning. But watching Sarah grow into a remarkable young woman, seeing how my sister and brother-in-law's love had helped heal the wounds of her early loss, made me understand something about God's ability to create beauty from tragedy. Father McKenna stood up and walked to the window overlooking the garden where Sister Mary Catherine had found the photograph. When I applied to seminary, I was completely honest about my past marriage and my daughter. The church investigated thoroughly, confirmed that my marriage had been valid, and that I was canonically free to pursue ordination as a widower. But they also advised me that discretion about my personal history would be wise, both to protect Sarah's privacy and to avoid complications in my pastoral ministry. So the church hierarchy knows about your past. Of course, Cardinal Morrison himself approved my ordination. But we agreed that my personal history didn't need to be public. Knowledge. Sarah was starting college, building her own life, and didn't need the scrutiny that would come with being known as the priest's daughter. And I didn't want my parishioners to treat me differently because of my experience with marriage and loss. Sister Mary Catherine felt a wave of relief wash over her. Father McKenna hadn't deceived anyone. He had been completely transparent with the church while maintaining appropriate privacy about his personal life. Sarah graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in engineering. Father McKenna continued, a note of pride entering his voice. She's married now, has 2 beautiful children, and lives in Atlanta. She understands why I chose the priesthood, and she's proud of the work I do here. We have dinner once a month, and she brings the grandchildren to visit several times a year, though most parishioners assume they're just family friends. Grandchildren? Sister Mary Catherine smiled, despite the emotional weight of the conversation. Emma is 8 and Michael is 5. They call me Uncle Tom, which works perfectly for everyone involved. Father McKenna returned to his desk and picked up the photograph again. Margaret never got to see Sarah grow up, never got to meet her. Grandchildren. But I like to think she would be proud of the woman Sarah became and the family she's built. Betud, Sister Mary Catherine studied Father McKenna's face and saw something she had never noticed before. A depth of contentment that came from successfully balancing complex responsibilities and honoring multiple commitments without compromising any of them. Father, I need to ask you something, and please know that I am asking out of concern, not judgment. Has carrying this secret been difficult for you? Has it interfered with your ability to serve the parish effectively? Father McKenna considered her question carefully. In some ways, Sister Mary Catherine, my experience as a husband and father has made me a better priest. When I counsel married couples, I understand the real challenges of maintaining a relationship through difficult times. When I bless newborn babies, I know the profound joy and terror that comes with bringing new life into the world. When I comfort families dealing with loss, I speak from personal experience about how grief can coexist with faith. He paused, looking out the window again. But yes, there have been times when the secrecy felt burdensome, times when parishioners shared their own stories of loss or family challenges, and I wanted to say, I understand, because I've been there too. Times when I felt isolated by having to maintain boundaries around such a significant part of my life experience. And now? How do you feel about me knowing? Relieved, actually. You've been like a sister to me for 15 years, Sister Mary Catherine. You've watched me serve this community. You've seen my dedication to the priesthood, and you know my heart. If anyone was going to discover my secret, I'm grateful it was you. Over the following weeks, the dynamic between Sister Mary Catherine and Father McKenna shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. She found herself noticing the little signs of his hidden life that she had missed before, the occasional phone, calls that made him smile in a particularly paternal way, the careful attention he paid to families with young children, and the extra compassion he showed to single parents struggling to balance work and child-rearing responsibilities. More importantly, she began to understand how Father McKenna's secret past had shaped him into the exceptional priest he had become. His personal experience with love, loss, and parental responsibility had given him insights into the human condition that enhanced rather than compromised his spiritual ministry. 2 months after their conversation, Sister Mary Catherine was working in the garden when she heard voices coming from the courtyard behind the rectory. She looked up to see Father McKenna walking with a woman in her 40s and 2 young children. The woman had dark hair and kind eyes that reminded Sister Mary Catherine immediately of the bride in the wedding photograph. "Uncle Tom, can we see the big tree again?" the little girl asked, skipping ahead toward the garden. "Of course, Emma. But remember what I told you about being respectful in the convent garden." As they approached, Father McKenna spotted Sister Mary Catherine and smiled. "Sister Mary Catherine, I'd like you to meet some very special friends of mine. This is Sarah, and these are her children, Emma and Michael." Sarah extended her hand with a warm smile. "Sister Mary Catherine, I've heard so much about you from Father McKenna. He's told me how much your friendship and partnership have meant to him over the years." As they chatted, Sister Mary Catherine watched the interaction between Father McKenna and his family. The love and respect were evident in every gesture. The way Sarah sought his advice about her children's education, the way the children instinctively turned to him for comfort when Emma scraped her knee on the garden path, and the way Father McKenna's entire demeanor softened when he was with them. "Sister Mary Catherine," Sarah said as they prepared to leave, "I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you and the other sisters do to support Father McKenna's ministry. I know he couldn't serve this community as effectively as he does without partners like you." After they left, Sister Mary Catherine returned to her gardening with a new understanding of the complex tapestry of Father McKenna's life. He had found a way to honor his calling to the priesthood, while maintaining his responsibilities as a father and grandfather. He had served St. Raphael's parish with dedication and authenticity, while protecting his family's privacy and his own ability to minister effectively. 6 months later, during the parish's annual Thanksgiving celebration, Sister Mary Catherine watched Father McKenna deliver a homily about gratitude, family, and the different ways that God calls people to serve others. As he spoke about the importance of cherishing the people we love, while also answering the call to serve the broader community, she saw several parishioners nodding with particular understanding. Mrs. Rodriguez, a single mother of three, seemed especially moved by Father McKenna's words about balancing personal responsibilities with service to others. Mr. Thompson, a widower who had recently begun volunteering at the soup kitchen, leaned forward as Father McKenna spoke about finding new purpose after profound loss. Sister Mary Catherine realized that Father McKenna's secret hadn't diminished his effectiveness as a priest. It had enhanced it. His hidden experience as a husband, father, and widower had given him insights and compassion that enriched his ministry in ways that his parishioners could sense, even without knowing the specific details of his past. After Mass, as the community gathered in the parish hall for their Thanksgiving feast, Sister Mary Catherine noticed Father McKenna in conversation with a young couple who had recently lost their first baby to stillbirth. She watched as he listened with the kind of deep understanding that could only come from personal experience with devastating loss. And she saw the relief in the couple's faces as they realized they were being heard by someone who truly understood their pain. Later that evening, as Sister Mary Catherine and Father McKenna cleaned up after the celebration, she reflected on everything that had changed since she had found that photograph in the garden. "Father, can I tell you something?" "Of course." Sister Mary Catherine. Finding that photograph was one of the most challenging things that's happened to me in 40 years of religious life. It forced me to grapple with questions about privacy, honesty, and the complexity of human experience in ways I had never had to before. Father McKenna paused in his wiping down of tables. "Was never my intention. I'm sorry it caused you distress. But I'm grateful it happened," she continued. "It taught me that God's call in our lives can be more complex and beautiful than we sometimes recognize. Watching you serve this community while honoring your responsibilities as a father has shown me that faithfulness isn't always about choosing between competing loyalties. Sometimes it's about finding ways to honor all of our commitments with integrity and love." Father McKenna smiled, and Sister Mary Catherine could see both the young husband from the photograph and the seasoned priest he had become. "Thank you for understanding, Sister Mary Catherine, and thank you for keeping my family's privacy protected while still allowing me to feel less alone in carrying this part of my life." Tsitsi. As they finished cleaning the parish hall, Sister Mary Catherine thought about the photograph that had started this entire journey. Father McKenna had taken it home that night 2 months ago, no longer needing to keep his past buried beneath the oak tree. The secret was still largely intact. Only she and a few church officials knew the full story. But the burden of complete secrecy had been lifted. The garden where she had found the photograph continued to flourish, providing fresh vegetables for the soup kitchen and serving as a peaceful retreat for prayer and reflection. But now, when Sister Mary Catherine knelt among the tomato plants or sat beneath the ancient oak tree, she thought not just about the growth of the plants, but about the growth of understanding, compassion, and appreciation for the complex ways that God works in human lives. Father McKenna continued to serve St. Raphael's parish with the same dedication he had shown for 15 years, but Sister Mary Catherine noticed a subtle lightness in his demeanor, as if sharing his secret with someone he trusted had freed him to serve even more authentically. His homilies seemed to carry even greater depth. His pastoral counseling appeared more effective, and his joy in celebrating the sacraments was more evident than ever. The photograph that had once been buried in shame and secrecy had become a bridge to greater understanding, deeper friendship, and more effective ministry. It had revealed not a scandal that needed to be exposed, but a beautiful story of how love, loss, faith, and calling could interweave to create a life of exceptional service and authenticity. Sister Mary Catherine never regretted finding that photograph in the garden because it had taught her that sometimes the most profound secrets aren't meant to be exposed. but to be understood, honored, and protected by those who are privileged to know them.